My apartment in Pennsylvania is the kind of place that looks exactly like what it is. Two nursing students doing their best. Bamidele and I had moved in together at the start of the academic year, drawn together less by deep friendship at that point than by the simple arithmetic of split rent and compatible schedules. She was 25, 2 years ahead of me in the program, the kind of person who laughs loudly at her own jokes before she's finished telling them and somehow makes it charming. I was 23, perpetually running on 4 hours of sleep and the kind of low-grade anxiety that nursing school manufactures at an industrial scale. The apartment itself was small and slightly cluttered in the way that student apartments always are. Not dirty, just full. Textbooks stacked on the kitchen table beside protein bar wrappers. Bamidele scrubs draped over the back of the couch because she'd come off a clinical shift and hadn't had the energy to make it to the bedroom. A string of LED lights along the top of the bookshelf that we'd bought on sale and never quite gotten around to fixing properly, so one section blinked on and off at irregular intervals like it was trying to communicate in Morse code. A diffuser on the side table that Bamidele had bought, claiming it helped her study, which I was skeptical about, but which did make the apartment smell consistently of eucalyptus. It smelled like a place where someone was trying very hard to feel calm. That Thursday night in October, we were not studying. We were doing the other thing nursing students do when they're not studying, collapsing entirely. Bamidele had come home from her shift at 6, showered, changed into an oversized t-shirt she'd had since secondary school, and positioned herself on one end of the couch with a bowl of popcorn balanced on her knees. I had been home all day, buried in pharmacology notes, and by 7 in the evening, my brain had produced its daily limit of functional output and simply stopped. I closed my laptop, changed into leggings and a hoodie, and took the other end of the couch. We had been meaning to watch this show for weeks, a crime drama everyone in our cohort had been talking about, the kind of series that starts with a single disappearance and then reveals, slowly, that everything about a small town is rotten underneath. We'd watched the first 3 episodes already and were firmly in the part of the viewing experience where stopping felt physically impossible. The evening was easy. That's what I want you to understand. There was nothing ominous about it, no creeping feeling, no hair standing on end. It was ordinary in the most complete sense of the word. We argued briefly about whether the lead detective was incompetent or just written that way intentionally. Bamidele laughed so hard at something she inhaled popcorn and spent 2 minutes coughing. I made us both tea during the episode break. I texted my mother back about the weekend. The apartment was warm and lit and full of the specific domestic comfort of 2 people who have become genuinely easy in each other's company. I did notice the weather had changed. Sometime around 8:30, the wind had picked up outside, not violently but insistently, the kind of wind that finds every gap in a building and reminds you of them. Our windows, which had been sealed with draft tape by the previous tenants, in a gesture I'd always found slightly ominous, made a low whistling sound when gusts hit them at the right angle. The temperature had dropped. I could feel it on my ankles, which were exposed beyond the end of the throw blanket. Earlier that day, I'd seen something on the building's notice board, a typed sheet from the management company, something about scheduled maintenance and the possibility of brief outages in the area due to infrastructure work in the neighboring block. I had read it with the casual attention I give to most administrative notices, which is to say I absorbed it vaguely and moved on. I did not, critically, mention it to Bamidele. I did not think to check whether we had candles. I did not think about any of this at all. We were on the 6th episode when the TV cut out. It didn't flicker, the way power sometimes does before an outage gives you a second of warning. It simply stopped. The TV, the LED string lights, the diffuser's soft glow, the light in the hallway we always left on as a kind of navigational anchor, all of it gone in a single, instantaneous cut, as if someone had found the master switch for the world and thrown it. The darkness was immediate and complete. The only light was the pale suggestion of the street below filtering through the curtains, enough to make out the general shape of the room, the light-colored surface of the walls, the outline of Bamidele beside me, but not enough to read expression or detail. Everything was shapes and degrees of gray. There was a beat of silence. Then Bamidele said, with complete composure, "Oh, come on." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The timing had been so absurd. We'd been at a pivotal scene, one of those moments where the music swells and the camera holds just a second too long on the wrong face, and then nothing. I laughed and Bamidele laughed, and the tension that had briefly seized my chest dissolved into something that felt almost fun, a minor adventure. "Candles," Bamidele said, already standing. "I know we have them somewhere." She navigated the room by memory and by the blue-white glow of her phone screen, pulling open the kitchen drawer where we kept the miscellaneous items that didn't have a better home. Batteries, a takeout menu for a restaurant we'd never ordered from, rubber bands, and, she made a small noise of triumph, a bundle of tea-light candles still in their packaging and a single tall emergency candle she'd bought at a pharmacy months ago after a smaller outage that had lasted an evening. I found matches in the same drawer. We lit the tall candle first, then positioned 3 tea lights around the living room, one on the coffee table, one on the bookshelf, one on the kitchen counter. The effect was immediately softer than it had any right to be. Candlelight, I have always thought, is a fundamentally dishonest light. It smooths surfaces, deepens shadows, makes the familiar look ancient and considered, like everything in your apartment has suddenly acquired significance. We settled back onto the couch with our phones, resigned to waiting it out. Bamidele was already checking the power company's outage map. I texted my mother, who has a sixth sense for moments when her children might be in minor discomfort, who had preemptively sent me a message asking if I had power, because apparently the outage had hit a wider area of our county. "Estimated restoration time is midnight," Bamidele read from her screen. "It's 9:45 now. That's manageable." "Completely manageable," I agreed. The candles flickered, not because of a draft, we hadn't opened anything. They flickered the way candles sometimes do, responding to something invisible, a shift in air pressure, a microcurrent from the ventilation system, or simply the natural variability of an open flame. 3 flames dipping simultaneously, shadows swinging in wide arcs across the walls, and for a moment the room rearranged itself into something I didn't quite recognize. It was a half-second. The flame steadied. The room settled back into its familiar geometry. "So," Bamidele said, pulling her knees up, apparently unaffected, "tell me something. Best way to pass the time." I tried to focus on her. I tried to have the easy, wandering conversation that fills the space between 2 people who know each other well. And for a while, I did. We talked about our clinical placements, about a professor we were both either afraid of or deeply impressed by, possibly both. We talked about the weekend, about the food Bamidele was planning to cook on Sunday if she had the energy. But every time the candle flames moved, and they kept moving in that subtle, constant way that suggested the air in the room was less still than it appeared, my eyes went to the shadows. And the shadows kept doing things that shadows, strictly speaking, shouldn't do. I want to be precise about this because precision is important to me. It's part of the reason I went into nursing, this need to accurately describe what I observe. I am not a person who sees things. I have never experienced a hallucination. I don't have a history of anxiety disorders or sleep disturbances or any of the conditions that might make me susceptible to perceptual misfiring. I am, by most assessments, a stable, grounded, empirically minded young woman. The curtain moved. Not the drape, the thin inner curtain, the translucent white one that filters light during the day. The window behind it was closed. I had checked the window myself earlier in the week because it had been sticking in its frame, and I'd been afraid of moisture getting in. It was closed and latched. There was no draft, and yet the curtain moved. Not a flutter, exactly, but a slow lateral shift, as though something had passed very close to it on the inside of the glass. I watched it for a moment. It went still. The building's ventilation, I thought. Air circulating through the system. Old building, lots of ducts. It doesn't mean anything. Bamadele was talking about one of her patients, a story she was clearly enjoying, a funny one, something about a misunderstanding involving a blood pressure cuff. I was nodding and making sounds of engagement while the part of my brain that handles threat assessment was running a parallel operation I hadn't authorized. The shadow in the corner of the room behind the armchair was the wrong shape. I told myself that immediately. I said it to myself in the reasonable, dismissive tone you use when you're trying to prevent your own irrationality. That shadow is the wrong shape because you're looking at it in candlelight, and candlelight distorts things. The armchair casts a different shadow when the light source is low and warm and moving than it does under overhead lights. You have never examined that corner by candlelight before. You don't have a reference point. You're comparing it to something you're imagining rather than something you've actually seen. All of that was true. I believed all of it. The shadow didn't change back. It sat in the corner of the room with its irregular, too tall shape, and the candle flame moved, and the shadow moved with it, the way shadows should, elongating and contracting in response to the light. But its base, the place where it met the floor, was in the wrong position. It was not originating from the armchair. It was not originating from anything I could identify. "Are you listening?" Bamadele said. "Yes," I said. "Sorry, what happened with the cuff?" She laughed, a little exasperated, and continued the story. I kept half my attention on her and half on the corner. After a minute, the shadow resolved itself. The candle burned down slightly, the angle changed, and suddenly it looked perfectly normal, perfectly explainable, perfectly the shadow of an armchair that happens to have a reading lamp on one side of it. I exhaled, told myself, "There, see?" That's when I heard my name. It was barely a sound at all, quiet in the way that sounds can be quiet and still carry, not volume but character, the specific quality of a human voice forming a human word. 4 syllables, the emphasis on the second, drawn out slightly at the end the way someone speaks a name when they're not calling but acknowledging. Aminata. I turned my head so quickly I felt the muscles in my neck protest. Bamadele was still talking. She was mid-sentence, not looking at me, gesturing slightly with her phone in the way she does when she's illustrating a point. Her lips were moving in a direction entirely inconsistent with what I had just heard. "What?" I said. She paused, looked at me. What? I didn't ask you anything." "Did you just say my name?" She gave me the look, the particular look she reserves for moments when she thinks I'm being strange. "I was telling you about the cuff. I haven't said your name." I held her gaze for a second. She was telling the truth. I could see it in her face. Mild confusion, no performance. She hadn't said my name. She didn't know what I was talking about. "Sorry," I said. "Thought I heard something. Go on." She went on. I sat very still and listened. The wind outside had picked up again. The old building made its accommodating sounds, the kind of sounds that old buildings make, the shifting and settling that gets cataloged as normal within the first week of living somewhere. I had learned to sleep through all of it. I had learned to identify every sound this apartment made at night and to file each one under known and therefore harmless. This was not one of those sounds. It came again. Softer this time and from a different direction, not beside me as before, but from deeper in the apartment, from the hallway that led to our bedrooms. Low, intimate, unhurried. Aminata. Like something that had sounded my name in the dark and was trying it out. The candle on the coffee table guttered hard, a full lean, almost to horizontal, and the shadows in the room swept violently to the left before snapping back. In that sweep, in the fraction of a second when the room's geometry had entirely rearranged itself, I saw something in the hallway opening, a shape, standing, and then the candle steadied and the hallway was empty. Bamadele laughed at something on her phone, a completely ordinary laugh, completely at ease, utterly, unbearably oblivious. I pressed my back into the couch cushions and felt my heart doing something it had no business doing at this hour of a Thursday evening, and I thought, very clearly, in the specific way you think things that you know are true even when you desperately want them not to be, something in this apartment is aware of me. I have learned enough about the brain to know that it is not a passive observer. The brain is an active storyteller, a pattern completion engine that would rather give you a wrong answer than no answer. In conditions of low sensory information, darkness, silence, uncertainty, it compensates. It fills in the gaps with material drawn from memory, expectation, and threat assessment, and it presents this filled-in version of reality to you as if it were perception rather than construction. I knew all of that. I sat on the couch and recited it to myself like a prayer. And then I heard my name again, and the prayer didn't hold. This time, it was not subtle. This time, it was close. Close enough that I could hear the texture of it, the breath underneath the word, the slight emphasis that could not be explained by wind or pipes or building acoustics or any of the things I'd been reaching for. This time, it sounded like a person standing approximately 3 feet from where I was sitting, speaking directly and deliberately into the left side of my face. I stood up. I didn't intend to. My body made that decision on my behalf, operating under some protocol that bypassed the committee. One moment I was on the couch, and the next I was standing in the middle of the living room with my phone flashlight on, sweeping it across the room in an arc that covered the corners, the hallway entrance, the space behind the armchair, all the places where the dark was deepest. Empty. Everything in its place. The curtain still. The armchair just an armchair. Aminata. Bama Daly's voice, real, solid, the voice of someone sitting on a couch watching their roommate lose her mind. "What are you doing?" "Did you hear that?" I said. "Hear what? You jumped up like something bit you." "Someone said my name. Someone. It was right here. It was close. It was—" I stopped. I could hear how it sounded. I could see it on her face. The careful neutrality of someone trying to decide how worried to be. "You didn't hear anything?" "I heard the wind," she said slowly, "and the building, and you. That's it." There are 2 things you learn quickly in nursing school about perception in mental states. The first is that self-reported experiences are valid data, even when they can't be corroborated externally. The second is that when a stable patient presents with sudden auditory experiences that no one else can confirm, you take that seriously as a clinician. As the patient, I was less sure what to do with it. "I'm going to check the hallway," I said. "Aminata, I'll be 30 seconds." I moved into the hallway with the phone flashlight, pressing close to the left wall where I could see the full length of the corridor ahead of me, our 2 bedroom doors, the bathroom at the end, the small linen closet beside it. All the doors were exactly as we'd left them. Bamadeli's room closed, mine ajar, bathroom open, closet closed. I stood at the entrance to the hallway for a moment and just listened. The building breathed. The wind moved outside. Somewhere below us, on a lower floor, a door closed. All of it cataloged, filed, dismissed. And then, from inside my bedroom, the door of which I was certain I had left only a few inches open, no more, came the sound of something shifting. Not a large movement, not a crash or a thump. The small, specific sound of an object being displaced on a surface, like a book being slid from one position to another, like a phone being picked up, like deliberate, careful movement designed to produce minimum noise. Every hair on my body stood at attention. I pushed my bedroom door open with the heel of my hand and put the flashlight into the room in one motion. My desk, my bed, covers slightly disordered from this morning. My closet door, closed as I'd left it. My window, closed and latched. On my nightstand, my library book and my water bottle and the small framed photograph of my family from last Christmas, all precisely as they'd been. Nothing moved, nothing wrong. I was standing in the doorway of my own bedroom, heart hammering, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand, looking at a room that was completely and utterly and incontrovertibly normal. "You're frightening yourself," I told myself. "There is nothing here. It's the darkness and the silence and the fact that your nervous system has been in low-grade overdrive since September because nursing school doesn't stop and you haven't slept properly in 11 days. You are frightening yourself, and the kindest thing you can do is go back to the couch and stop." I went back to the couch. Bomadele had lit the third tea light, the one from the kitchen counter, and brought it into the living room. The space was slightly brighter for it. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read, somewhere between concern and the specific patience of someone who is choosing to be steady so that you don't have to be. "Nothing," I said. "Okay," she said simply. I sat down. I picked up my phone. I breathed. The whisper said my name a third time. Right behind her. Immediately behind her. In the space between the back of the couch and the wall, where no one was sitting and no one could be sitting and no one was. I looked up, and I saw it in the mirror. The mirror on the far wall, a decorative one we'd hung there in the first week because it made the room feel larger, was showing me the reflection of the couch, of Bomadele's profile, of the candles and their warm, moving light. And in that reflection, in the space just behind Bomadele's right shoulder, where the mirror showed the wall and the dimness beyond the candlelight's reach, there was a figure, not a shape, not an ambiguous smear of shadow, a figure, standing still the way something stands when it is watching and does not intend to be seen, but has miscalculated, has been seen anyway, is now perfectly and terribly visible in a mirror that was purchased for $14 from a discount home goods store and was never supposed to show anyone anything like this. I screamed. It was not a dramatic scream. It was the involuntary, airless kind, a compressed burst of sound that came out before I'd decided to produce it, before I'd processed what I was seeing, before anything except the most ancient and fundamental part of my nervous system had its say. Bomadele spun around. Her elbow caught the bowl of remaining popcorn. Kernels scattered across the floor, with a sound that was almost comic against the backdrop of what had just happened. The room was empty. The wall behind the couch was exactly the wall behind the couch, faintly lit by the candle on the coffee table, slightly yellowed paint, the edge of a picture frame. Nothing else. Bomadele turned back to me with wide eyes and a posture that said she was approximately 2 seconds from deciding whether to be frightened or practical. "What?" she said. "What did you see?" "The mirror," I managed. In the mirror, there was someone." She looked at the mirror. We both looked at the mirror. It showed us the room as it was. 2 women on a couch, candles, scattered popcorn, nothing behind us. "Amanata," her voice was very steady. "There is no one here." "I know," I said. "I know there's no one here. I saw it anyway." We sat with that for a moment. And then, at 11:53, I know because Bomadele looked at her phone to check and told me, every light in the apartment came back at once. The overhead lights, the LED string on the bookshelf with its blinking section, the hall light, all of it. The diffuser gurgled back to life. The TV blinked on, showing a streaming service loading screen. The room in full light was exactly what it had always been. Modest and familiar and completely, exhaustingly, mercifully ordinary. The whispering had stopped. I sat in the bright room and looked at my hands, which were trembling slightly, and tried to explain to myself what had happened. I couldn't. I still can't, fully, in the way that I could explain something, pointing at them and saying, "Evidence, fact, the world is a dangerous place, and here is the proof." I have no proof. I have only the experience and what I've learned from it, and the unshakable certainty that I am glad I didn't scream sooner. Bomadele made us both tea after the lights came back. She didn't make a big production of it, didn't over-explain or over-reassure in the way that people sometimes do when they're not sure what to believe about what you've told them. She just went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and came back with 2 mugs and a plate of biscuits and sat beside me on the couch, and we let the brightly lit room simply be what it was for a while. Later that night, after Bamadele had gone to bed and I was sitting up with my pharmacology notes because sleep seemed entirely out of reach, I thought about what I'd studied in my emergency preparedness unit. We'd spent half a session on psychological responses to environmental disruption, sensory deprivation, fear-induced hypervigilance, the phenomenon of pareidolia, the brain's tendency to locate faces and human forms in random visual data. In darkness and silence, with threat detection systems on high alert, the brain becomes extraordinarily creative. It finds patterns and noise, it assembles figures from shadow, it hears voices in the space between sounds. I believe all of that. I hold that explanation in one hand. In the other hand, I hold the memory of what I saw in that mirror, the stillness of it, the deliberateness, the way it occupied space with the particular weight of something that knows you're watching, the way my name sounded in the dark. I'm not sure the two hands need to be reconciled. Maybe what matters isn't whether the threat was real in a measurable, evidential sense, but that my fear was real and my response to it was the right one. Here is what that night taught me that no classroom had managed to fully convey. Darkness changes the terms of safety, not just physical safety, psychological safety too. The sense of orientation and control and accurate perception that we rely on without knowing we rely on it. When the lights go out, that safety becomes conditional in a way it wasn't a moment before. The practical things first, because they matter and they are real. Have candles that you can actually find in the dark, not candles in a drawer you only know about in theory. Keep a flashlight, a physical flashlight, not your phone, somewhere you can put your hand on it in total darkness. Know the layout of your apartment by feel, not just by sight. These are small things. They cost very little, they matter significantly. But the psychological things matter too. Know that your brain will compensate in darkness, and that its compensations are not always accurate. Know that the sounds you hear in a power outage are a mixture of real ambient noise, structural sounds you normally filter out, and your own nervous system manufacturing signal from noise. Be skeptical of your perceptions without dismissing them entirely, which is admittedly a genuinely difficult calibration. And trust your instincts. This is not a contradiction of the above. Your instincts and your perceptions are not the same system. Your perceptions are sensory data being processed and interpreted, subject to distortion and error. Your instincts are older, faster, and often running on information you haven't consciously registered yet. I could not have told you at any point that evening exactly what was wrong, but I could tell you from the moment the curtain moved that something was wrong. The two are different. The first is what your eyes see. The second is what your body knows. I never found an explanation for the whispers, or the figure in the mirror, or the shadow in the corner that was the wrong shape. I've held the memory up to light from every angle I know how to use, and it remains opaque. What I know is that I stayed calm enough to investigate rather than freeze, that I kept light in my hand, that I did not open the front door, that I did not go anywhere alone in the dark, and that I was, in the morning, still here to be confused about it. That has to count for something.